Reaction to President Obama's speech, I'm now joined on set by Harlan Ullman, a retired U.S. Naval Commander and Senior Advisor to the Atlantic Council. And in Oklahoma City, we have Joshua Landis, the Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'd like to get both of your reactions to the president's speech. And Josh, I'd like to start with you. What did you make of his message?
I think it was a very strong speech. He's got to rally the nation to back him up for the use of force. Without the use of force, Assad is going to wiggle out of this without the potential use of force. But secondly, he narrowed his ambitions, which was chemical weapons. And he said, we're not going to get into the civil war. We're not going to get sucked into this. And he tried to separate the morality of going after chemical weapons on a very narrow ambition and not trying to change the balance of power. And that's an important message because in negotiating with Assad, with getting the Russians on board, he's got to differentiate between those two things.
Harlan, I'd like to get your take because the president did seem to lay out his case. But was there anything new here?
There was really nothing new. He could have made a much stronger case saying that the Russian overture that I think was really started by us and Secretary John Kerry, I don't think what Kerry said in London was an accident, that if they are going to give up their chemical weapons, then the use of force is really critical. But he hasn't said anything, in my judgment, to sway public opinion. I think the country is overwhelmingly against using force because we don't understand the what next issue. The fact that 400 babies were killed is horrible, but if you take a look at the horrors that are going around the world, in Africa and elsewhere, what happened in Cambodia in 1973, there have been these horrors. And yeah, chemical weapons can possibly kill people more rapidly, but Assad's father killed 15, 20,000 people in Homs using conventional weapons. So I don't think that the argument that the president made is going to be very persuasive. I don't think members of Congress are going to change their minds. And he was offered really a lifeboat by President Putin, ironically, because if, and this is a big if, there are lots of questions, if the initiative to get Assad to give up his chemical weapons can in fact be put into some kind of credible process, and that's very difficult, then everybody wins. But the downside of everybody winning is that means Assad wins, and this means that Assad is likely to stay if in fact he survives this. And so the Americans can't have it both ways.
Well,
either we get rid of chemical weapons and Assad stays, or we're stuck, we're going to attack, and I'm afraid the attack is only going to make things worse.
Well, and Josh, Harlan made the point of there wasn't a what's next scenario, and that's something a lot of people have been asking the president and other members of Congress who supported a military strike. Where does the international community go from here after listening to this speech? The what next question, I mean, was the president covering his bases, his options here?
He's in a bind. He is in a bind without the ability to use force and credible, sort of immediate use of force, because already the French are putting forward before the UN Security Council a 5-point plan for how these chemical weapons are going to be transferred. Evidently, one of those points is that they want the people who use the chemical weapons to be punished in some way and go before some court of law. Assad is not. He's going to resist that kind of thing, and we can see already that he's going to say, look, I agreed to put my chemical weapons under a third party, but I'm not going to get involved with courts and punishing people, and he hasn't agreed that his government and his regime is responsible for this. So we're going to get into those sorts of problems, and it's going to drag out, and then the world's going to turn its attention away from this, and Assad is going to sense that he can wiggle out of it, and that there won't be a use of force. And that's getting a credible threat of use of force is going to be the biggest challenge for the president.
Well, is there a timeline here? The president said he'd like to keep the military on standby in case diplomacy doesn't work. But as this Russian proposal gathers steam, if it does actually happen, how are they going to inspect these sites, collect these weapons as this civil war rages on around them?
I don't think that's the issue. If you take a look at what happened in Iraq in the 90s, I think that can be done. I think that the next couple of weeks will be really decisive in determining whether this is serious or not. And if Syria is going to participate, I think that will be seen as something that can be clearly judged. As far as the forces on station, that's not a real issue. We're talking about Tomahawk cruise missiles. We've got plenty of those things. But I'm afraid that if this process gets bogged down, which it could easily, this is a long, long, long shot, it may not work, then I think the president will have no other option except to attack, and I think he will. And I think this is going to make matters a lot worse.
Josh, I'd like you to get to weigh in on this as well. How do you think this will end, and how long do you think this will go on?
Well, you could see a lot of different avenues. The president will have to attack if there's too much delaying and lingering. On the other hand, Moscow's got a lot involved, in a lot on the line, and it wants to look like a positive force here, and it will want to save Assad. And Moscow will be, this puts Assad in a sense in a driver's seat because they're at this table. And he can say, well, I can give up my chemical weapons, but you have to give me more classical weapons and more airplanes and more helicopters. And Russia is likely to do this in those conditions because they'll want to get the chemical weapons. And so in that sense, Assad may come out stronger in this. And that's a possibility.
All right, Josh, Landis in Oklahoma City, Harlan Ullman, we appreciate your time. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us here on this very interesting occasion.